All right, guys, again, great to have you here. Very excited for you to be back at the Corporate Man series. We're going to go ahead and talk about something very instrumental to your development, especially as a young man. So I'm speaking specifically to the teenagers, also to the 20-year-olds, all those guys, now also to older men, but specifically I want to target the younger guys. The trait that I want you to be able to master is to be able to fight. Not fight physically, but be able to fight in a place where you can deal with things internally. It's much more difficult to deal with things internally. Many men are wimps, okay? They give an external veneer, but on the inside, okay? So I want you to be able to do that because it's going to show in your work, it's going to show in your corporate environment. I've seen it many times, okay? We oftentimes think, well, I just work the job, okay? But oftentimes, if we don't deal with things internally, they show up, okay? And I'm going to give you an example of that. But again, I want you to be able to fight. So I want to give you something that I found in Scripture that's going to be very instrumental for you. It's in Lamentations 3:27. It said, "It is good for a young man to bear the yoke in his youth." I'm going to say that again. It is good for a young man to bear the yoke in his youth. What does that mean? Okay, what that's simply getting at is that you don't want to waste your youth. There's strength in youth. That is the time to deal with things internally. Okay, we shouldn't wait until we get to 40s, 50s, even 60s to deal with things internally because there's not as much fight. But when you're a young guy, man, I mean, you have so much energy, you can use those things to deal with things internally. Okay, so I want to give you an example. David, okay, David was a king in Israel. David, as a young guy, was someone who fought. But he dealt with things so that when he got to the big challenge, he was able to stand up to it and deal with it. So it talks about in Scripture where he dealt with the lion and he dealt with the bear before he got to Goliath. Goliath was the big one, but he had to learn to fight. And he dealt with the lion. He killed the lion. He killed the bear. But when he got to the Philistine, he had already been able to conquer those areas. And that's what I want for you, is to be able to identify things on the inside of you that you know you need to deal with. And maybe everyone doesn't know the things internally with you, but you know. Okay? You know where maybe there's fear. You know where maybe there's intimidation. You know where maybe there's pride. And so I'll give you an example. And this is relevant to corporate environment. I was working a job, and in that job, I was the absolute worst employee in that department. Now, I say that, it doesn't mean that my attitude was the worst, but my performance was the worst. And the reason was because I was full of pride. I had so much pride. I thought I was all these different things. I felt that because there were things I knew I was able to do, that was going to carry the day, and I wouldn't have to dive into the inner workings of what the job actually entailed. And so it got to a point where it began to be very glaring, and everyone began to notice and see that, hey, this guy really doesn't understand some of the things that are going on. And again, I want you to hear this, but I want you to see, again, for young guys, that these are the things that you have to be able to deal with. Because if I didn't deal with that, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. Okay, so it got to a point where I remember, and I was on the phone, I was making calls, and I had messed up again, and my manager kept coming in saying, you know, we really have to be able to deal with this. We know the potential you have, but we really have to be able to deal with this. And I kept telling him each and every time, you know what, I know where I'm at right now, but I am going to get there. And I didn't care. I said, you know what, I looked him in the face, I looked him right in the eye, and I said, I am going to get there. I'm going to deal with this area of my life. And you know what? I made a decision, and when I went home one day, I said, you know what? I can't allow this to continue. And I had to expose myself. I had to go to the guy next to me in the next booth over and say, hey man, I don't really know what I'm doing, man. Can you show me? Now, this is a great testimony because I then became known as the most thorough in that department. So, challenge is, deal with the thing internally. Recognize your youth and emphasize and don't waste your youth. Fight for yourself. Fight for what you know that you can do. I want you to be able to reach your potential, what's been placed on the inside of you to be able to do. So the challenge is identify one thing. Again, just like we talked about with the story of David, we're not necessarily looking at Goliath right now. We're looking at the lion and the bear. So I want you to be able to identify one thing, okay? One thing, specifically for those who are working in corporate environments or you have your own business, identify that one thing so that you can begin to deal with that, and we'll continue going forward. Again, we're on this journey together. I appreciate you guys. Again, don't take this as information, but let's look at really implementing these things so that we can press forward. I'll talk to you soon.